This week, we're going to continue looking at problems of identity and how do we identify who the doctor is. A couple of things that we looked at last week were that some of the psychiatrists going back in time of Kierkegaard, Freud, Jung had always looked at, even Descartes had looked at identity as being fixed. It was one person. You had this core identity that did not change. Nowadays, we've kind of shifted, and the idea of not only personal identity but social identity has come in. And today, we've abandoned this view of a modern, fixed, stable, unitary identity. The modern idea of identity, which we talked about last week, was what had been in place from the Enlightenment, from the Middle Ages, Enlightenment through the 20th century, was that you had one fixed, stable, unitary identity throughout your lifetime. And there were many ways that they were trying to test how to determine what is your identity. Today, we now think that the identity is fluid, it's multiple, it's socially constructed. Think about how many identities you have on a daily basis, how you act from one situation to another, how you are with your family versus how you are with a friend versus how you are with a classmate versus how you are with your boss. And not only is your identity your internal identity, it is also the identity that society constructs of us. When someone walks up to you and they see you, you have a certain identity, you have a certain appearance, you have a certain height, weight, you have a certain look, you have a certain way of dressing, of holding yourself, of carrying yourself. All of that is mixed together into who you are. And so we take on different roles in different settings. Sherry Turkle makes a valid argument that one wakes up as a lover, makes breakfast as a mother, and drives to work as a lawyer. And it's still Sherry at the end of the day, but she has different roles throughout the day, and she has different identities throughout the day. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our context makes it different. Classroom, we act differently than we would at church, at a party, at a family dinner. So who am I no longer is just one single answer. It's a multitude of answers. And so when we say, who is the doctor, we no longer have to try and fix, as Descartes or Jung or Freud would. They would try and piece him together as one person, as one identity. Whereas nowadays we can look and say that he has multiple identities and he's multiple different people, too many different people. Within the identity theory from sociology, this again goes into role identities, and the character and the role of an individual devises as an occupant of a particular social position. In other words, sometimes our idea of self is hierarchical, meaning sometimes the way we think of ourselves is in relationship to someone who is above or below us. So we may think of ourselves in our ancestry as all of the people who came before us, and then our ascendants, all who will come after us. Sometimes within society, you may think of yourself as, in an office setting, you may have a boss, you may have yourself, and then you may have an administrative assistant. And so there's someone who's below you reporting to you, and you're reporting to someone above you. And so there's constantly these hierarchical roles of identity that we're playing with. And we need to think about that as well with the doctor. Within ourselves, for example, just within the classroom, we have this power structure of professor-student. You're lower on one hand in power than the professor is. Let's look now at, and the same thing with a doctor. A doctor has power over the patient. So when we look at the doctor, a Doctor Who, what kind of identity are we going to ground him in? The identity that he has with Rose's mother, with Mickey, the identity that he has with any of his companions, the identity that he has in relationship to a fellow Time Lord, the relationship he has to other aliens, He has a multitude of identities, but at the same time, who is he? At the end of the day, when he's alone in the TARDIS by himself, who is he? And that's at the heart of the question that we will try and get to, though most likely we'll not be able to answer. We also have self-presentation and identity. There are symbolic markers that help us express who we are. Think about signals that we send out, the way we dress ourselves, our hair, body modifications, tattoos, piercings. And even within that, think about the symbolic markers as you're doing them. In the classroom, when I discussed this particular aspect, there was about 5 or 6 different guys in the classroom who had tattoos. And as we were talking about them, only 2 of them had tattoos that showed, that I could see visibly on their skin at some point. And the other 3 said that they got tattoos, they liked tattoos, but because of the symbolic marking of it, the symbolic way people will view them and identify them, that they make sure that it can be covered up with their regular clothing so you don't see it unless they want you to see it. And so there's a whole symbolism there that we have an identity that we're wanting to express, but we hide part of it because of the social identity that will be placed upon us. I know you haven't met me, but I am overweight, quite overweight. So as soon as I step out in public, society sees me as a certain person just by me being overweight, and that's something I cannot hide. If you're an African American, that's something that society sees as a symbolic marker automatically that cannot be hidden. And so we often have things that we can hide, such as tattooings, piercings, and there's things that we can't hide, such as weight or skin color, that are symbolic markers of our identity. This is the way that identity is socially constructed, not only by ourselves, but in our relationship with others, what they think of us, what we think of them, and then how we think of ourselves based on what they're thinking of us. I'm giving you just a couple of examples of some interactions and some social identities. Notice we have a doctor and a patient, so we have the doctor in a power role, so there's the hierarchy between the patient and the doctor knowing more than the patient. But at the same time, we have the social construct. The doctor is assuming that the patient is going to be there and tell him everything that's wrong so that the doctor can identify it and treat it. Most patients go into doctor's office fearful, somewhat apprehensive, and they often don't share all the information they need, so they retain certain things, which is going to make this interaction break down and not be as fulfilling as it could be for both parties. So sometimes there's a bit of deceit. We have the front stage that we present to people, as Steve Jobs does on stage. The stage is very clear, everything's clean and crisp, but backstage everything's a mess, it's a jumble. And this is very common for most of us, that behind the scenes we are very disorganized, we have our own systems of putting things together within our identities, but then when we need to present to the outside world, we present a certain front. But just like that patient to the doctor, there is sometimes when we are deceitful, and that's where we're going to start up next.